Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Canadian Club, I'm honored to welcome the Prime Minister to our podium today. He is now distinguished as the leader of a minority government that has compiled an impressive record of achievement. Leading in a minority situation has historically proven to be a bit of a high-wire act. Prime Ministers dating back to Mackenzie King would attest to that. It takes a good sense of balance and nerves of steel to pull that off. Tightrope walking and minority governments make for interesting watching for spectators and political junkies alike. But if our Prime Minister has made one thing manifest in his close to 2 years in office, it's that he has no fear of heights. In fact, our Prime Minister has been very successful in the development and implementation of sound public policy that even a majority government would be grateful for. Innovative policies supporting a national cancer strategy, vaccine initiative, and wait list guarantees are just a few of the policies implemented by the vision of our federal government, while at the same time supporting our troops at war. Last month's throne speech reinforced the government's priorities and outlined their agenda for the fall. The Conservatives set out goals on environmental protection, violent crime, the easing of inter-provincial trade barriers, and setting formal limits on the federal spending in provincial jurisdictions. And then the throne speech was followed by last week's economic statement. It includes cuts to the GST, personal and corporate income tax. And along with the throne speech and the economic summit, with every passing day and every confidence vote in the House of Commons, election speculation continues to grow. However, we're here today to hear about the Prime Minister's vision for Canada on the road forward into this century, a road that he believes will take us through the next election and beyond. I'm looking forward to hearing from our Prime Minister on these and other important issues. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for our special guest this afternoon, the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Alan, for that kind introduction, and thank you, everybody, for that very warm and generous Toronto welcome. As sponsors and honored guests of the head table, colleagues from the Parliament of Canada, ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct honor for me once again to have the opportunity to address this prestigious organization, the Canadian Club of Toronto. Je crois que vous reconnaîtrez tous et toutes que nous faisons les choses plutôt différemment à Ottawa comparé à l'ancien régime. Aujourd'hui, le gouvernement est propre, l'économie est forte, le pays est uni, et le Canada est de retour sur la scène mondiale. The last time I spoke to the Canadian Club, our Conservative government in Ottawa had been in office for just 2 months. Now we have become one of the longest-serving minority governments in Canadian history. Our government doesn't claim to be perfect, but we can say, after 21 months in office, that our economy is strong, the government is clean, the country is united, and Canada is back as a player on the world stage. And despite some saber-rattling by the opposition, it remains my conviction that the public doesn't want an election, but they do want us to get on with the job of governing so they can plan for the future with confidence. Because as I said in the debate on the speech from the throne, it really is, and we should never forget, really is the people, not the government, who have built this country, the Aboriginal people, whose roots run deepest in our beautiful land, les aventuriers français qui ont jeté les fondations de l'État canadien sur les rives du Saint-Laurent il y a près de 400 ans, the British settlers who brought the democratic ideals and institutions that we've molded into our own, and of course the immigrants from every corner of the earth who have enriched our society with their traditions and with their ambitions. As we govern, we must always, and we try to always remember, that Canada is their legacy to us. Enriching this heritage for future generations is our duty to them. And every day, millions of Canadians are doing that. They're setting the nation's moral compass by teaching their children right from wrong. They're making our communities better by giving more than they take. And they're building our economy with their hard work and creativity. Le discours du trône a été adopté par le Parlement et notre gouvernement va aller de l'avant sur 5 priorités principales de notre plan, un leadership fort, un Canada meilleur. Aujourd'hui, j'aimerais vous parler de l'importance d'une de ces priorités, diriger notre économie vers un allègement fiscal et une prospérité continue. The speech from the throne has now been passed by Parliament, and our government will move forward on the 5 core priorities of our plan, Strong Leadership, A Better Canada. These priorities are to strengthen Canada's sovereignty and place in the world, to modernize our federation and democratic institutions, to make our streets and communities safe once again, to protect our environment and, by extension, the health of Canadians, and to steer our economy towards continuing long-term prosperity. It is the last point that I wish to talk to you about today. There are several planks in our plan to keep building the Canadian economy, including we've announced the largest infrastructure investments in cooperation with all levels of government in half a century in this country. We have an aggressive agenda of international trade negotiations. We have put new investments into science and technology strategy. We have new initiatives in education and skills, in immigration and foreign credentials recognition. And we are undertaking a review of our investment and competition policies. Mais l'aspect le plus important de notre agenda économique est d'avoir une bonne gestion financière nationale et de réduire les taxes et les impôts et de les garder bas. But none of these things is more important than the priority of good national financial management, of getting taxes down and keeping them low. Now, last week, the Minister of Finance, the GTA's own Jim Flaherty, he must be doing a great job, he's become James Flaherty. Jim Flaherty, as you know, issued the government's pre-budget economic statement. You all well know the context of this particular action. While our economy remains strong, Canada is not immune from the significant uncertainty that has grown in the world economy in recent months. With weakness in some of our export markets and the rapid appreciation of the dollar, we are living in challenging times. We felt a need to act early, to send a clear message that for those looking for optimism about the future, this country is rock solid. And so we announced another major step in our agenda of cutting taxes for every single individual, family, and business. L'énoncé économique de la semaine dernière prévoyait un allègement fiscal additionnel de 60 milliards de dollars et depuis notre élection, nous avons pris des mesures qui réduiront les taxes et les impôts des particuliers et des sociétés de près de 200 milliards de dollars en 5 ans. Le fardeau fiscal fédéral sera à son plus bas niveau depuis un demi-siècle. With the $60 billion of cuts announced last week, the total actions taken by this government to date are approaching $200 billion over the next 5 years. Federal taxes will fall to the level they were at in the last year of the Diefenbaker government, before the policies of the late 1960s, before Trudeau, back to the lowest level in nearly half a century. We are determined to create one of the most competitive and attractive tax environments on the planet. That means lowering taxes for everybody, employees, businesses, investors, and consumers. Through the measures we introduced last week, purchasing power will go up, take-home pay will increase, and Canadian businesses from small domestic entrepreneurs to global giants will flourish and create jobs. L'impôt fédéral sur le revenu des sociétés passera de 22% cette année à 19,5% le 1er janvier et à 15% d'ici 2012, le plus bas taux d'imposition parmi les principales économies du monde industrialisé. Key to our objective for a strong business environment is the reduction of the federal corporate income tax rate from 22% this year to 19.5% on January 1st to 15% by 2012, the lowest corporate income tax rate among the major developed economies. That's where we're headed. Combined with the elimination of the federal capital tax, the acceleration of cuts to small business taxes, and further drops to employment insurance premiums, our government is determined to create the conditions for business to succeed. And that success will fuel prosperity by providing greater opportunities, better jobs, and a better quality of life for all Canadians. Les simples citoyens profitent aussi d'un allègement fiscal. L'exemption personnelle de base a encore été augmentée et le taux d'imposition le plus bas du revenu des particuliers a été diminué. Et plus de 600 000 Canadiens à faible revenu ont été éliminés des rôles d'imposition. Individual Canadians are also benefiting from tax relief. The basic personal exemption has been raised again, and the lowest PIT rate has been lowered. As a consequence of this, over 600,000 low-income Canadians have been taken off the tax rolls altogether since we took office. Just as importantly, there have been reductions in personal income tax in the form of tax incentives to benefit families and workers, like the deduction for kids' sports and the transit pass tax credit. And there have been major improvements in the system itself, like finally ending the marriage penalty, a $2,000 credit for every single child, and pension income splitting for our senior citizens. Une autre mesure majeure est bien entendu ce que nous faisons avec la TPS. 3 ans avant ce que j'ai promis à maintes reprises aux dernières élections, soit réduire la TPS de 7 à 6 à 5%. Another major action, of course, is what we're doing with the GST 3 years ahead of what I promised repeatedly in the last election, the GST cut from 7 to 6 to 5%. On January 1st, all of us will pay a little less on everything we buy. It adds up to a massive $6 billion a year tax cut that touches every single Canadian. Now, I do see, as an economist myself, I do see that there are economists who don't like the GST tax cut. These are economists who believe the GST is a good tax, which of course comes from the school of economics that believes there is such a thing as good taxes. But look, as I said in our caucus, we're perfectly willing to write the legislation so that any economist or anyone else who wants to pay a higher GST rate will be allowed to do so. Fait plus troublant, mesdames et messieurs, est la réaction au Parlement face à nos mesures fiscales. Aucun des 3 partis d'opposition n'a appuyé la réduction des taxes et des impôts. More troubling, ladies and gentlemen, was the reaction in Parliament to our tax reductions. None of the 3 opposition parties supported tax relief. The NDP basically called tax cuts a waste of government money. The Bloc called them, I guess, something like a humiliation for Quebec. I think they need a little line. The Liberals called the tax cuts too big. The Liberal leader just kept saying the GST cost $35 billion. The GST cost $35 billion, as if the only good tax cuts are really small ones. A philosophy, of course, they practice to perfection when in power. But I want to be serious about this for a second. The Liberals' opposition to tax cuts should deeply trouble you, should deeply trouble Canadian taxpayers. The Liberal Party under Mr. Dion has been against every single tax reduction this government has proposed. Tax relief for families with children, they voted against it. Pension income splitting and other measures for senior citizens, they voted against them. Tax relief measures for businesses, small and large, they haven't supported a single one. And of course, they're against cutting the GST as well. Mais mesdames et messieurs, il s'oppose à plus que ça. M. Dion a bien fait comprendre que s'ils en ont la possibilité, les libéraux augmenteront la TPS en un clin d'œil. But ladies and gentlemen, the Liberals are against more than just cutting the GST. Mr. Dion and his party are making it pretty clear that given the chance, they would raise the GST back again in a heartbeat. Now, is that really a surprise? Because I read that the guy writing Liberal policy for the next election is apparently one Bob Rae. Some of you may remember. Spent 5 years using Ontario as a lab experiment for tax, spend, and borrow economic policy. And the big spending proposals that Mr. Dion is already on record supporting can only be financed through either massive deficits or higher taxes. I do not question the Liberals' right to articulate such policies. Democratic politics is about giving the voters choices. But our government will continue to do what we believe is right for the economy, to keep taxes down, and we will continue to argue that reversing that direction is simply not the best policy for the country and not worth the risk for our economy. Mesdames et messieurs, jamais depuis un demi-siècle, les Canadiennes, les Canadiens n'ont eu un fardeau fiscal fédéral aussi léger ou un plan économique aussi ciblé. Nous laissons derrière nous les vieilles habitudes d'imposition, de dépenses et d'emprunt. We are finally putting the tax, spend, and borrow legacy of the last half of the 20th century behind us. Besides reducing taxes, we're keeping spending focused on getting results, and we're paying off debt. By February, the Minister of Finance will have paid off $37 billion off our national debt just since we took office. It's no coincidence that we are seeing economic numbers not matched since the tax, spend, and borrow era began some 40 years ago. We are en route to yet another year of strong economic growth. Inflation and interest rates remain low. Canadians' real disposable income has risen 6% over the last 18 months. Average hourly wages are up 4% compared to this time last year. Taxes are at a 44-year low. Unemployment is at a 33-year low. 10 years ago, 16% of Canadians lived below the poverty line. Today, only 11% do. 10 years ago, nearly 19% of children under 18 lived in poverty. Today, less than 12% do. 10 years ago, over half of all single mothers lived in poverty. Today, less than 30% do. Ce n'est pas la perfection, mais sont toutes normes raisonnables. Nous affichons d'excellentes réalisations et nous allons dans la bonne direction. Et ça nous permet de relever nos défis dans les secteurs forestiers, manufacturiers, de l'infrastructure et de l'éducation et de la recherche. This is not perfection, but by any fair measure, this is a good record of achievement, moving in the right direction. And it gives us the flexibility to tackle our challenges, to provide adjustment funds to the workers and the communities of the struggling forestry sector, to allow big write-offs for capital investment in manufacturing, to strengthen investments in world-class education and research and to put new funds into neglected infrastructure. You know, it's worth noting that our economy has been showing tremendous resiliency against a range of economic changes. Here in Ontario, for example, despite the well-documented difficulties of the manufacturing sector generally and the auto sector in particular, we've just seen 2 straight months of strong job growth. And over the year, employment growth in this province is actually now running above the national average. Nationally, job growth among the self-employed in the services sector is very strong, including professional, scientific, and technical services. So far this year, the construction and utility sectors are doing well, and cultural industries are hiring too. The unemployment rates for women over 25, for workers over 55, are setting all-time records. So yes, we have some problems, But as our esteemed finance minister said more than a few times last week, and let's not forget it and broadcast it to the world, the fundamentals of our economy are as solid as the Canadian Shield. And keeping taxes down, not raising them back up, is key to keeping this country moving in the right direction. Mesdames et Messieurs, notre premier discours de trône s'intitulait « Une nouvelle feuille de route » qui reflétait notre mandat de changement. Et nous avons livré la marchandise. Maintenant que nous avons tourné la page, nous nous tournons vers l'avenir. Ladies and gentlemen, last year we entitled our first speech from the throne, Turning a New Leaf. It was a reflection on our mandate for change. We delivered most of the elements of that mandate. And now that we've turned a new leaf, we are fixing our sights on Canada's longer-term horizons, on where we want this country to go in the 21st century and how we will get there. This time we have chosen as our symbol the North Star. Now let me be clear, I mean the North Star, not the Toronto Star. The North Star has been a guide for mariners and explorers for centuries. And like the North Star, this country, Canada, has been a guide to other nations. Through difficult times, Canada has shone as an example of what a diverse people joined in common purpose can achieve. A nation of prosperity and hope, a land of freedom and human rights, a country where merit trumps privilege. Yet Canada's greatest strength has always laid in its energy and determination to move forward and build an even better future for the generations next to come. Notre gouvernement est déterminé à faire preuve d'un solide leadership pour que le Canada ait un avenir encore meilleur et avec un Québec plus fort au sein de ce Canada meilleur. Our government is committed to strong leadership to realizing an even better future. A Canada proud of its leadership in the world and confident of its economic prospects. A Canada built on a strong federation and a robust democracy. A Canada that is safe for our families and healthy for our children. I believe that as Canadians, we can all stand and look back on a very proud history. But what we must do is look forward to a horizon that is as limitless as the size and as the promise of this country. Thank you very much for your attention and for inviting me. Merci beaucoup et à la prochaine.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. I'm going to call on John Capobianco, who's the director of the Canadian Club, to offer some formal thanks.
Great, thanks, Alan. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for joining us here today and for the privilege of being able to hear firsthand about your vision for our country. In the government's most recent speech from the throne and in the Prime Minister's address today, we heard of Canada being compared to the North Star. Canada, it was said, has been a guide to other nations. Through difficult times, Canada has shone as an example of what a people joined in common purpose can achieve. Prime Minister, you've mentioned many of the challenges that lie ahead for Canadians, challenges both immediate and those lying on the horizon. A great nation, and Canada is indeed a great nation, needs great leaders to whom its people can look when tested. Confucius said this about leadership in government, and I quote, "He who exercises government by means of his virtue may be compared to the North Polar Star, which keeps its place and all the stars turn towards it." On behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, let me echo that sentiment. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you very much for an inspiring speech today, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, John, for that, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. The format's a little bit different today, and as we get our main course started, I encourage everyone to take a look in the center of your table at our upcoming lunch. Hope to see you back on December 10th. We have lunch with the Governor of the Bank of Canada, David Dodge, and in the new year, on the 31st, our annual political and economic forecast. Enjoy your lunch, and I hope to see you back at the Canadian Club soon. Thank you.